Example 1, using the zero factor property. We want to be able to solve the quadratic equation 6x squared plus 7x equals 3. Now, the key word in this property is 0, which means that we want to set this equal to 0. So we're going to have to subtract that 3 to the other side of the equation. So in order to do that, we should get the following. We should get 6x squared plus 7x minus 3, and we're going to set that equal to 0. Okay, so that's the first thing we want to do to make sure it's set equal to 0. Okay, now what we need to do is we need to factor this trinomial in order to then use and complete the zero factor property. So in order to do that, we're going to have to use the standard form of a quadratic equation. The standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c, and that's equal to 0. So we need to figure out what represents a, and so in our problem we can see that a is the coefficient of x squared, which is 6. Now what is the coefficient for x? Well, the coefficient for x is 7, so b is going to equal 7, and the constant, which is c, is going to equal -3. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to use the AC method to factor this problem. Okay, so what we need to do first is find out what is A times C. Well, we know that A is the value of 6, and we know the value of C is -3. So 6 times -3 is going to give us -18. So now what we want to do is we're going to create this method where we're going to apply the value of AC using this x. So the value of AC is going to go on the top, and then the value of B is going to go at the bottom here. So basically what we're going to do is the following. We're going to put -18 up here, and then put the value of B, which is 7. And so what we want to do is we want to come up with two numbers that when we multiply to get -18, it's going to give us +7. So, one way of doing that is just taking 18 and then figuring out what is the prime factorization of 18. Well, that's 2 times 9, right? So if we multiply 2 times 9, it's going to give us 18, and we can see that the difference between 9 and 2 is 7. But now we need to figure out that when we multiply that together, it's going to give a negative, but the value of 7 has to be positive, which means that we would say that -2 times +9, okay, does that give us -18? Yes. -2 times +9, does that give you 7, +7? Yes, it does. Okay, so now in step number 3, what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the original step from part 1 here, where it says 6x squared plus 7x minus 3. So what we're going to do is we're going to write the first term, which is 6x squared, and then we're going to write the last term, which is -3. So I want you to notice here that the middle term was 7x. So if we apply -2x plus 9x, that ends up giving us 7x. So now what we're going to do is we're going to replace the two middle terms now in the middle here in between 6x squared and -3. So I'm going to write -2x and then plus 9x. Now, it doesn't matter if you put the 9x first or the -2x first. You're still going to come up with the same result. But we're going to go ahead now and then factor. So in order to factor, we want to be able to factor by grouping. So we're going to draw a line in here to separate the first two terms and the last two terms. Okay. So now, in step number 4, we're going to look at these first two terms and ask us, what can we factor out between those first two terms? Well, the common or the greatest common factor we can factor out is the number 2 and the value of x. And then what's going to be left over is the following. Well, 2x times what's going to give us 6x squared? Well, that's going to be 3x. And then 2x times what's going to give us -2x is going to give us -1. And then we can check to make sure. Okay. So now that we factored the 2x out and what was left is 3x minus 1, we should get the exact same thing on this side. So we're going to go ahead and write 3x minus 1 over here. It's the same procedure every time you factor this way. Now I need to say, and I look above and say, okay, what do I need to multiply by 3x to get 9x? And what do I need to multiply by minus 1 to get negative 3? Well, we know that that's going to give us positive 3. Okay, and now what we're going to do in step number 5 is now factor what's left. Well, this is one term, and there's the second term. So what do each term have in common? Well, they have a 3x minus 1 in common, which means that we can factor that out. So now, if we factor that out, we're left with 3x minus 1. If we factor that out, then what's left is 2x plus 3. And so now we've been able to factor this, okay? Which means that if we multiply these two binomials together, we would end up with that result. So now that we factor this, now we're going to write this in step number 2. So for step number 2, we're going to write this now in factored form, which is 3x minus 1 times 2x plus 3, and that's equal to 0. Okay. Now we're going to use the zero factor property because we have two things that we're multiplying together that's going to equal 0. And because it's equal to 0, now we can set this up saying that the first binomial, which is 3x minus 1, is going to equal 0. And then the OR statement, and then 2x plus 3 equals 0. And now we're going to solve both equations for x. So if we add 1 to both sides, we get 3x, which is equal to 1. And then divide both sides by 3. And therefore, we get x equals 1/3. Or, over here, we're going to subtract 3 to both sides. And we get 2x, which is equal to negative 3. Divide both sides by 2. And therefore, x is going to equal negative 3/2. Okay? And now we're going to write this as a solution set, which means that we have two solutions. So we're going to write our braces. The smaller number of the two is the negative 3/2. And then the other solution is 1/3. And therefore, there is our answer.